È un Illimity Talk, Illimity, Banca Illimity, che da tempo realizza questi talk, quindi dei dialoghi tra il management, tra Corrado Passera in particolare, il CEO della banca e fondatore, e personalità nel mondo della cultura, intellettuali, dell'economia, eccetera. Quindi introduco subito Barbara Carfagna che condurrà questo dibattito tra Corrado Passera e Laurence Tubiana, che è il CEO of the European Climate Foundation. Quindi vi lascio a loro e ricordo che siete con tempi televisivi perché siamo in streaming dall'inizio alla fine. Prego.
Buongiorno, benvenuti. Oggi faremo questo che è il nostro quarto ILLIMITY TALK, quindi un confronto appunto tra Corrado Passera, che ha una carriera manageriale, imprenditoriale e politica, quindi uno sguardo sulla complessità che è anche il tema del nostro ILLIMITY Talk su oggi, particolarmente diciamo ferrato, e appunto Laurence Tubiana sui temi della sostenibilità ma anche della complessità, perché appunto questa è un'epoca in cui non possiamo più pensare di dividere e separare i settori in maniera netta come facevamo nel passato, e dobbiamo in questo senso riuscire a capire ed a studiare quali saranno le nuove modalità di leadership per governare appunto la complessità. Cominciamo subito e la nostra interlocutrice di oggi è appunto Laurence Tubiana. Parleremo in inglese. She's the CEO of European Climate Foundation and one of the leading advocates of the COP21 Paris Agreement on Climate Change. She will be speaking to Corrado Passera, as we told, CEO of ILLIMITY, about the complex issue of change and sustainable development. Laurence Tubiana, you want to introduce yourself before the debate, talking to our public, and tell something about
yes.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Very happy to be here and very happy to have this conversation with Corrado Passera. Very happy to have this discussion at the juncture moment. We have listened to, maybe you have been listening these last days to the UN conference, well, all the discussion around Antonio Guterres, United Nations Secretary General. And we see that now momentum for climate action and climate change is moving. And of course, I'm very happy of that, as I was, as you know, the former negotiator for France for COP21. And so for me, it's really encouraging to see now better signs.
Okay, so the first question is for you. And the COVID pandemic has even had an impact on climate negotiations, forcing them to be cancelled or postponed. How can the Green New Deal be protected in times of such great uncertainty caused by a global pandemic that perhaps has finally taught us economic development is not possible without protecting the world in which we live?
Thank you. It's a very important question. Does the COVID have stopped global diplomacy on climate? Yes, but at the same time, it has really highlighted the necessity of global cooperation for managing a very global risk like COVID. And that's really interesting that the Green New Deal in Europe, the Green Deal, has been finally supported by all leaders because, in a way, in the midst of the crisis, the leaders realize that the best vaccines to the biggest challenge we face, from health to climate change, from low growth and employment, the high risk of high unemployment, and the deepening of social inequality, everything has to have a global response. And in Europe, this global response name is a Green Deal. This was given to the pandemic as a response because finally, the response we are giving now will determine our way of life for the next decade and whether we manage to build a safe climate for all. And what I'm looking in a way, government are moving it at least even with a different vision within Europe. We saw that the Green Deal has been asked for the consensus for it. And we see that businesses as well and citizens are moving ahead. But of course, we know we have to move faster. And that must be the objective of the Green New Deal, go deeper, have a consistent policy for all sectors. And we see that very inspiring move from the European Commission in particular, from the President von der Leyen these last days at the UN convention, at the UN conference around Antonio Guterres, the commitment to go for at least 55% of emission reduction compared to 1990 by 2030. It is a real Green Deal. The Green Deal budget, in the previous panel, you were commenting on the opportunities that the Green Deal is offering to many countries, in particular because additional funding from Europe. And this really, it's an unprecedented budget for the next generation. So again, a very positive sign if we use the resources well. And China, which was of course the big news of this week, has committed to peak emission before 2030. That was not new. But what's new is that President Xi said they want to reach carbon neutrality before 2060. This is a totally new stance from the Chinese leadership. So together, the EU and China, representing more than a third of global emission, are leading the way, says they will really do something strong in the view of 2030. That's how the spirit of the Paris Agreement finally lives. But we need many more countries, of course, to join if we want a good chance. And of course, the question, of course, are very much organized about the result of the US elections. And we certainly can discuss that later on. What I see very important from the Italian point of view is that your country will lead the G20 next year. And that year will be key to mobilize countries to raise ambition, to propose new plans, new climate plans. But at the same time, Italy, throughout this G20 presidency, can mobilize the role of business and investors. We need to transform supply chain, look at the discussion, very important discussion around Mercosur and the problem of deforestation. We have to shift investment from high carbon to zero carbon, and to ask government to put in place clear rules to guide private and public investment in the right direction. We have the EU taxonomy, which has powerful elements on what can be considered green and enshrines and do not harm and do good principle. So that's a model that countries should use when designing their recovery plan. Europe has taken the lead. The outreach of the diplomacy of the Green Deal is going on. I see that a very positive result about the conversation between EU and China. And so I think we should be proud to be Europeans these days, but really very careful on not missing the opportunity and not missing to use in a really sound way the resources, the additional resources which are offered. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Passera, we heard about G20 and the way and the importance of be coordinating in leading this complex society in a moment like this one. But there's not a risk of a G0, as you told, in which countries have to build their strategy, and they want to build them in their own backyard. So exactly the contrary, without a shared long-term vision. We see in Italy that also the regions want to do by themselves, not coordinated by national vision.
Let me first thank Laurence for joining us. It's a great honor to have her in this ILLIMITY Talk in such an important event. The risk of the G0 is not anymore a risk, it's a reality. Until a few years ago, we were all talking about enlarging the G20, and now we are back to G7, to G0 actually, because everybody is working its own way, and some of the big global powers are just confronting the others rather than working together. So this risk is already a reality. In front of this situation, none of the big problems we have in front of us climate, criminality, migration, none of them can be tackled, can be solved at the national level, going each one by itself. So the risk is very high. And Europe, in such a situation, has a very special responsibility, because confrontation amongst global powers will not take place only in the economic, in the military arenas. It will be a clash of civilization. We will have to confront, we will compete in terms of social models, economic models. And Europe is the best fit to find a new normal that can group together people with the right will. What do I mean by designing a new platform of values? We have to find a new balance between values that traditionally were considered opposite and self-exclusive. Merit, solidarity, freedom, equality, openness, identity. Europe has always been able, in the last two millennia, to find new levels of cultural balances, and that's a new case in which Europe can take this challenge. At the same time, Europe needs a new phase of growth, because without a new phase of sustainable and sustained growth, we run the risk of losing our well-being, of losing several of our rights for which we have been working and fighting for centuries, and maybe even our sovereignty. Growth has to be the right one, I said, and I qualify that as a sustainable growth. And for that we need a major effort in terms of federal investments. What do I mean by federal investments? I mean investments that are selected, managed, financed at the EU level. Because most of the things we have to do in terms of infrastructure, research and innovation, energy migration, single market, can only be done at the European level. None of the country on a single basis can address such major projects. But 2 months ago, 3 months ago, Europe has made a major step in the right direction. We invented, if I can use this word, Eurobonds. We made them a real thing. So we have the mechanism to finance federal efforts, federal investments. And that's something that probably we are underestimating in terms of importance. We have opened a new door, and also for what we are discussing today, the climate problems and the energy migration, we have now the instrument to go much faster than in the past.
Thank you. And Mr. Tubiana, according to what we heard from Corrado Passera, how can we reconcile the different priorities from country to country? What role should governments play, particularly on aspects of climate change, of course, and this often requires choices that are unpopular with medium long-term effects rather than the short-term consequences that fit well with electoral processes?
Well, first, let me tell that I totally agree with Corrado on this particular moment where the world is so fragmented and where this question of the cultural investment in new values to try to find new objective, new consensus is stronger than ever. And we are back in a way to times where values are not a very strong feature from the international relation, but mostly a demonstration of power, whether it is in economic terms or in military terms. So I do think that culture here and the cultural and the balance, just that we, at the same time, people can find they feel that they are sovereign of themselves, of their lives, but at the same time, they understand the values of global cooperation. And I think this notion of discussion of sovereignty seems to me very important. You refer to even the region wanting to have their own say or their own definition of their future. And I think it's important we rediscuss how finally you cannot, as Corrado said, we cannot be sovereign if you don't cooperate with others to tackle these big issues about, and Italy is well placed on migration. You can't solve that on your own, whether it is a region of the government at the national level, and that's the same for all these global problems. And health, of course, was a powerful demonstration of it. So I think we need to rediscuss what sovereignty means and how you regain sovereignty, control on your own lives if you have a solid framework of cooperation and shared values. And I do think that citizens are not far from desiring that. There was a lot of inquiries, even in US these days. There was I think I saw that in New York Times this morning. You saw that majority of Americans want US to go back to the agreements where Trump decided to live, like Paris Agreement, for example, or the Iran deal. So citizens, and at the same time, in the midst of this crisis of COVID, you saw that citizens were asking for the ecological transition as a way to get out of this crisis, that you can't just have the same system with the same evolutions. And I do think that, for example, it was really important to see that Italy is working at the same time that managing the health crisis, working on its long-term strategy for decarbonization. And if all countries prepare their long-term views and share their experience around what the future should look like, I think we can build again a momentum of discussion that is not about pure brutal power relationship, but more about how we gain sovereignty by sharing ideas and values and objectives. I see that that's why I insist so much on what happened in the next decade. What do we do for 2030? And in particular on these NDCs, these climate plans, who can be the investment plan for the recovery, the green investment plan for recovery. And I think that is really, and you mentioned, of course, the conflict of short-term electoral cycle and the way that citizens can perceive this green transition as a threat for their well-being. And I think that's why we have to put social justice at the very beginning of the definition of these plans. I think it was probably too focused and too separate climate on one side and all the different global responses. But we have to put the citizen and the global justice at the center. There will be a new report launched this week in Italy, whose name is Ossigeno per la Crescita, or Oxygen for Growth, and showing that if Italy invests 80% of the EU resources, focusing on decarbonization, that will increase the GDP by 30% and the employment rate by 11% by 2030, with a strong improvement in opportunities for younger people. And by the way, in addition, Italy would lower its debt level to pre-COVID time by 2030. But at the same time, there is really the importance of the choices that are made today and be prepared to invest in the more promising zero carbon opportunities. Of course, we know, and Italy has been thinking about that, renewables, energy efficiency, electric mobility. And with the finance and technology we have today, we can think bigger. And to tackle the next challenge, we need to have a plan, not only to phase out coal, which is, of course, the ongoing discussion in Europe and of course, very necessary, but we have to look at the gas. In particular, I know that the debate is very strong in your own country. Put the end date for the sale of fossil cars, and in particular, recognizing that the gas, investing in new gas facilities, new gas infrastructure is no longer economic and not needed for the security of the system. So we need a combination of the top technology, digitalization, renewable energy, storage system, grid. This makes possible to move from coal to renewable in a secure way. And Italy has so much a rich sun, wind, and high tech. That will build clarity. We see hydrogen, but most importantly, I think Italy at this juncture, and again, because of this very difficult context and the very terrible effect that the Trump diplomacy has had on many other countries. I'm thinking of Brazil, I'm thinking of Australia, even in Mexico and some others. Europe has to show the leadership in this. And as a founding country, Italy has a big responsibility. So even if I agree with Corrado, there is no more real G20, but that could be an inspiration to call these countries, one, that they are facing major risk if they don't cooperate, and second, that they need to rebuild some kind of common values. And that will be a very important moment next year to do so.
So, Mrs. Tubiana, just a question, because today there's an article and we are talking about it in Italy. Are we in the mood of avoiding a climate lockdown, or this is just an alarm that a famous economist today published?
I think, of course, the climate risk seems so far away. And that's why there is a sort of a distance, or because what the science is telling us, or where the carbon budget is, and the extreme events that are, they seem far away when actually they are here and now. And we see that because partly of the migration is coming from climate impact in a number of poor countries. And I do think that, yes, we can face situation where the climate risk will be much, much, much more impact than the COVID has. So I think we should be very serious about that risk. And I agree that it's not looking like catastrophic or having a sort of a terrible vision of apocalypse vision of the future, because we can act on that. We can absolutely be active on this issue, but we should not underestimate the seriousness of this risk just because it seems far when actually it's coming. You look at the fires in California, you look at the flood in India, you look at even the extreme event of the drought in Europe, and you see that we cannot just ignore that. So I totally agree with the danger we are facing.
Mm-hmm. So, Mr. Passera, is Italy ready to face this challenge of sustainable development issues, and we can take advantage of this unique opportunity, turning it into a chance to create a new green economy, or we don't have the right leadership to do it?
Laurence, you must know that we envy you very much because you are comfortable in your home while we are in a sort of tornado and winter is suddenly back in Milano. But getting back to the question, is Italy ready? The answer is we must be ready because we have in front of us a spectacular opportunity that no government, no parliament has ever had on the table in the last decades. We have more or less 300 billion available to redesign our future, something that never happened in the past. And we have to be capable to use them. As Laurence was saying, we need a plan because the worst mistake we could do is to just make a shopping list of hundreds of little projects without an overall vision for the future of the country. Obviously, we must subdivide the interventions in short-term and medium-term interventions, and we can afford it because the amounts, the sum of the money we have available is such that we can really work both on emergency short-term projects and on medium-term ones. It has to be a plan. Everything has to be connected. And if we want to avoid the very serious crisis we have around the corner if we don't do the right things, we have to take into consideration at the same time growth. We have to take into consideration the very heavy social malaise that has been accumulated in the last decades, not only years, and the technology developments that we can take advantage of. In my opinion, there are three main priorities short term and four main reforms we have to work on. The three main instruments we can use to foster a new phase of growth are the energy of the virtuous companies, because at the end, employment comes from companies. And what can we do to use the energy that can come from the good business? We have to reward, from a tax point of view, companies that hires people, that invest in innovation, that reinforce, strengthen their equity, that aggregate different companies, because these are the four things we need to have sustainable and sustained growth in our country, also in Europe, but certainly in our country. Second point, it's an incredible opportunity to modernize our infrastructures, physical infrastructure, digital infrastructure, energy infrastructure. And the energy transition we are discussing today can be accelerated in a major way if we put enough money in that direction and if we use special powers to make the authorization processes and the implementation processes faster. Third, short-term intervention, healthcare systems. We experienced a number of problems, a number of weaknesses at the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis. Now, through the EMS, we can have the money to cope with these weaknesses and fix them. And these are the three short-term interventions I would suggest. At the same time, we have to work very seriously on the four basic reforms that could redesign our country and create opportunities. The welfare mechanism, the justice mechanism, the education, I would put education at the very first point, and bureaucracy. Each of them would need a seminar in itself, but what I want to stress, as Laurence was saying before, the vision, the plan, where to insert all the projects that can be financed through the recovery plan and the SURE plan and the EMS money has to be a common one, very much discussed and supported throughout the political forces.
Okay, now from this moment I ask you to answer in a shorter time because we are going to approach the end, but we have many interesting questions yet to answer. Mrs. Tubiana, according to what we heard until now, I want to remind that Denmark named an ambassador with big tech companies, and Microsoft named his representative ambassador some way in UN. So, can companies really bring the drive needed to cause change, and will blue, as we are in a green and blue festival, that is, of course, green is about environment and climate and sustainability, and blue is digital. Will blue pay the green?
Well, it's a very good question. For the moment, it's not happening. And it will be really good to think the two with the same vision and in a way the same and a connection. For the moment, as we know, the digital economy is one of the sectors who is now increasing its impact in terms of environment, in particular because of the energy consumption and the rare earths, etc. So it will be very essential to have the two combined too. I see, by the way, the high-tech, the companies like Amazon or Google or others that are beginning to be very concerned about their footprint and wants to be, which is case for Google, 100% really fed by renewable energy. So you see that discussion. At the same time, we see that this transition on ecology, and not to be too long, will require a transition, a professional transition, and new jobs, and certainly an evolution in the professional sphere. How the future of work, the digital impact on the organization work would work, we have to think the two at the same time. And it's very good you do the green and blue, because if not, we can have a transformation of work because of the digitalization, and at the same time, a lot of the impact, because climate policy would require a number of change in the workforce and the skills, etc. So it's very central not to miss that opportunity. Can the companies be the driver? I think they need to be connected to the public discussion on where the technology is going, and with an interaction with citizens and governments. I don't think it should be only relying on companies' vision, because again, they can have short-term horizon as well. And we need really a public discussion, a citizen discussion about what the future looks like and what the businesses and investors could go in that direction. But we can't think the two in separate terms. For the moment, it's the case. So I congratulate you for that initiative to think the two at the same time. But we don't have the responses for the moment, and it's really welcome to produce them.
Mm-hmm. So, Mr. Passera, as you had both the roles, I ask you the same question. Will blue pay the green? And your bank, ILLIMITY, that was born on such grounds, focusing on companies and people, has a purpose and a reason for such a choice.
You certainly heard what Laurence said. Companies are not enough to make our capitalistic system more responsible, both in terms of environment, social, and economic. There are a big number of companies of different sizes and different industries that are behaving very responsibly, but we also need rules. In many cases, we don't need new rules, because if we think about it, we already have a number of rules that are available but are not applied. Some of the extreme behaviors in our capitalistic systems that have caused some of the worst crises come from the lack of courage in applying antitrust legislation, privacy rules, legal haven situations. So the message here is that we already have some of the rules that can avoid the main drawbacks of non-responsible capitalism. So let's all together force our also politicians to apply courageously some of the legislations that are already available and that could avoid many of the worst aspects of non-responsible capitalism. As far as ILLIMITY, very shortly, we try to prove every day that a company can be a profitable company, but at the same time can have a positive impact on the community that is part of. We decided to specialize in SMEs, PMIs, as we say in Italian, small and medium-sized companies, but not all of them. Those who have a hidden potential, companies that can make a leap forward and maybe other banks do not support. Companies that had problems, but that can be brought back to profitability and success. Companies that have had major problems, but where still there is parts, assets that can be valued. So it's a combination of making profits, because a company has to make profits to be independent, free, and to develop, but at the same time trying to be useful for the community we are part of.
Okay. We only have 2 minutes, then we have to leave the stage to the next panel. So just other 2 rapid questions. Mrs. Tubiana, why do you think a Green Party has never managed to do well in Italy, perhaps even in the form of grassroots activism, as seen recently in other countries, like Germany, Ireland, and France?
You know, the future of green parties have been quite uneven in the different countries, even looking at my own country. So that's interesting that I see now the Parti Democratico taking the ecological transition as a flagship program. So maybe that's the solution. I have, of course, no particular competence. I do think that what is as important as having a green party is having a very vivid citizen organization that are really that have an agency to really plea for environment. Because again, as I don't see government could do that on their own, and they need to have constituency behind them. So I don't know, of course, what the solution. I saw you had at one point in time a Green Party which was very active, in particular very active at European level as well, and has brought a number of things. But I do think that finally I see that Italian citizens are very much in favor of climate and ecological transition. And they are the first ones who are in Europe that are really thinking that the Green Deal is important. So anyway, I think the ecology can be brought by many, many parties with different political views and sensitivities. So I don't think that it's not because you don't have a Green Party strong now that you don't have a project on ecological transition in Italy. At least I hope so.
Thank you. And last question, what is the role of citizens and of new generations? We have seen huge movements before COVID on climate change and sustainability, and how important is collective mobilization and awareness?
I get back to what Laurence was saying before. Italy is not the only country where there is not a green movement that was able to become a major party. And certainly, as she was saying, it's not because there is no this sensibility, this awareness of the importance of climate problems. Probably what would create the conditions for a green movement to become a strong party is the lack, for the time being at least, of an holistic view of sustainability, because environmental sustainability, especially if it is too ideologically extreme, is not enough to put together an enough strong party. If sustainability is understood and presented as economic, social, environmental sustainability, and that becomes a view of the community we want to create, much more balanced, much more open to innovation, much more open to diversity, then there would be a trigger for creating a strong movement with sustainability as a flag. That will need leadership, and the kind of leadership we need in today's situation is a very different leadership from other periods of the history. We need people with vision, people with courage, because the resistance to change is very strong. People that love diversity, innovation, creativity, people that accept a certain level of errors, and people that like to create other leaders. But that would bring us to another discussion, and we do not have the time today. Thank you very much for how you manage this discussion.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Tubiana. I hope to meet you in person and have an interview in person. That is always different. Also, this is a good way to communicate in this period. And thank you again to Mr. Corrado Passera. And we will meet again for other ILLIMITY talks with his experience that is not so common in private and public, that could help community to build a new sustainable and right leadership. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.